On the government, we have at least one. Is this correct? All right. Opposition, SMU 6.
Yes.
All right. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to start the semi-final.
Now, what we say clearly on the government side is that religions is a set of beliefs. But we don't mind when people start practicing their religion or not. But we say it's very detrimental when senators or people who make the laws start putting their beliefs into the law and legal system. Now, we say there is difference when religion is used in groups, difference when religion is used as an individual belief. And we say that when it comes to groups, it should never happen in society. Now, in today's debate, this is how our definition is going to go. When we say this house, we're talking about democratic countries. The reason we say democratic countries, Mr. Speaker, is because we believe there is a need for separation between church and state, separation between religious and the government. Now, we say, Mr. Speaker, when we say ban, we're talking about not allowing these people in these group parties to participate in the legislative system. When we say religious parties, we're talking about political parties that are based on certain religions. For example, if you look at constitutions of political parties, you see religious values and ideas implemented in these constitutions. We say these parties are exactly the parties that we do not want in a democratic system. When we say politics, we say very clearly that we're talking about the legislative parties, and we're talking about the Congress, the law-making process. Now, what we say, Mr. Speaker, is our stance, that religion and politics does not mix. In today's debate, there's going to be two major arguments that we are going to deal with. The first argument being on the effect of the democratic system. The second argument is going to be dealt by my second speaker, Yuran, about how is it bad for the religions themselves. Now, let me go on to my first argument. Now, we say, Mr. Speaker, that in a democratic system, what you see is that as long you can practice your religion, as long as you don't harm the other person, another person. But when we see religion and politics being put together, what you see is that it affects massive groups of people. We don't want people to be harmed by certain people, a small amount of people in the Congress. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is about how that policies, once a religious party starts making laws in a legislative system, they put much more values in front of policies. And we say that that is something that we never want to see in a democratic system, because we say that these laws that are passed affect massive groups of people. To give you an example, we have the California Proposition 8. When you look at that proposition that has been passed, this is a proposition this is a law that limits marriage into a man and a woman coming together as marriage. And we say, Mr. Speaker, that this is something that cannot be done. The reason is because the people who affect these laws are people who put their religious ideas into these laws. What you see is no justification at all of these people passing these laws. When we look at Proposition 8, these people have completely every right to be married because there is no effect on other parts of society. But the people who pass these laws are the people who believe that being homosexual, being gay, is a sin. We say this is a poison pill. This is going to affect not only these people who are close to the law, but the people who are completely away from the law. And we don't want to see this at all. Before I go on, yes?
Do you have actually any proof is senators with the specific religion that all rallied up and passed that motion?
We say that these religions is exactly when church and state come together. And this is not what we want to see. What we see, Mr. Speaker, is that these laws are being passed because of the religious ideas and great religious ideas of these parties. And we do not want to see this because we say that religion and politics never mix. Now, we also say, Mr. Speaker, that the distort of legislative process. What we see is that it's okay if senators have their own religion and practice religion, but once you see these senators being in a group, it affects a huge amount of these policies. To give an example, when a representative, a person who is in the legislative Congress, starts saying that he is a Christian, and he sees a law that will benefit a huge amount of people, a huge group of people, but the problem is that his religion, Christian, will just not allow him to agree with that law that is going to help a group of people. That is what we don't want to see. That is what we want to stop. Please take a seat. We say that is not representation in a democratic society. You want to see equal representation of these people. Once you have a group of people having a belief, it's never going to be an equal representation, but a distorted representation at the end of the day. So, Mr. Speaker, what have we told you very clearly? We've told you that religion can be used by a certain person that in his own individual lives, but it cannot be something that represents in a society at all. Once you start putting religion in these democratic systems, it's never going to benefit anyone. So I told you that policy is not going to be the priority of these people, but values are going to be the priorities of people. We also told you about how representative democracy is very important, and church and state should never come together. But once you start allowing religious parties in these democratic systems, what you're going to see is unequal representation and distortion of representation. And this is not what we want to see at all. That's why, Mr. Speaker, what we see on the government side is that religion and politics does not mix and should never mix, and therefore we are very proud to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and now I invite the Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speakers, and Madam Speakers. It is once again a great honor to be here at the quarterfinals of this year's Spring KNC. Now, without further delay, I would like to briefly mention what I'm going to do during my next 7 minutes to once again change the world. So, I'm going to briefly rebut to the points the previous speaker provided, which was, going to be cut brief because there's not much to rebut. And then move on to our stance, opinion, and then move on to the first part of our constructive speech. Now, well, it was really funny when they said in the beginning of the speech that they said everyone should have a religion, it's not much of a harm, that they was good. And then they move on to defining as banning and not allowing senators to have a religion, or banning senators who have a religion to be banned from a certain political party. That's kind of contradictory. And regarding the fact that even though they are senators, well, they do have the freedom of religion. Shouldn't we let them at least have something called a religion in the first place? Now, moving on to the substantive argument the first speaker tried to propose. Well, she said that it was added to a hindrance. No, thank you, sir. No, sorry, ma'am. No offense. Anyways, that it was a hindrance to the democratic system. Well, regarding the fact that a democratic system works with a majority party in which the people actually choose. Yes, once again, the people choose. It's not the senators who choose themselves to be senators and to be the majority. It's the people who choose them. Well, we should actually follow the majority rule. It doesn't mean that we're going to totally neglect the minority. It means that at least we should go with the flow of the majority. And regarding the fact that the people actually agreed, the people actually voted to let these people, even though they might be a majority of the society, to actually govern them, to lead them towards a better good, to lead them to make policies that they agree upon. Well, we say that even though they may be religious values inside those political arguments, well, we say that we should accept them. Furthermore, regarding the fact that the opposition did not provide any tangible harm, any detrimental harm to change the status quo, which we believe is quite stable. No, thank you, ma'ams. Okay. Anyways, well, we say that there is not enough need to actually disrupt current political order throughout the world, and especially in the democratic society. Furthermore, well, it shouldn't, once again, regarding the fact that, no thank you ma'am, well, regarding the fact that, finally she made an assertion about the fact that religious values should not be valued. Well, we say also that they're going to only respect religious values. We say that they're going to also implement political values because we do call them politicians, and they are actually politicians themselves. They're not some kind of religious leaders. They're actually politicians. What about that, ma'am?
We gave you tangible examples like Proposition 8, where people have not been able to be their rights were represented.
Okay, thank you. I got your point. Well, regarding the fact that, well, okay, she pointed out, she gave us an example about not being able to have gay marriage. However, how was that directly related to a certain religious belief? Why is that totally based on only religious beliefs? It could be also regarded as political interest, and it's also a social consensus that we marry the other opposite sex. It's a majority opinion that we do actually agree with. We do have normal marriages with the other sex. No, thank you, ma'am. When regarding the fact that, as we said, we're not going to totally neglect them, and regarding the fact that it's a very minor case, a very little glitch in this democratic system, we say that, of course, democracy is not a perfect ideological system. We say that it's the best option we have, and we shouldn't hinder the basic beliefs within the democratic system. So today, our side opposition, we believe our stance is that we believe in the people's voice. We have 4 constructive arguments. The first is that in the spirit of democracy and the nature of parties. The second is the fact that it's actually infeasible. The third is even if it would be feasible, it would be very dangerous. The fourth is that it opens the floodgates to bad and negative opportunities to other parties as well. So I will talk about the first 2 arguments, and my next speaker will talk about the third and fourth argument. So, before we move on to the constructive case, I would like to propose a burden to the proposition. Well, the proposition today has to directly prove that religious parties are dangerous and they're actually a threat to the society. And that, I hope you do a great job in, because if they don't, well, we're going to win. Anyways, no thank you, ma'am. No offense at all. Okay. Going on to the first point. Well, the spirit of democracy and the nature of parties. Well, as I continuously mentioned, democracy is giving the choice to the people. It is listening to the voice of the people. It is respecting the votes of the people. And if the people gave the power to a certain political party, we say that we should let them run the country until the people's voice changes. And then, furthermore, and regarding the fact that in the status quo, religion is directly linked to our everyday life, regarding the fact that religion is not something totally bizarre, a certain minority only does in its everyday life, we say that religion also should be implemented into politics, because politics itself deals with our everyday life. No, thank you, ma'am. For instance, why do we rest on Sundays? Why is it legally allowed to rest on Sundays? Basically, it was based on Christian beliefs that God made the world in 7 days, and in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he took a nap, or he rested, or whatever. So that is why we have a legal basis in politics to go home and stay home and take a nap as well on the 7th day of a week. And furthermore, it moves on to the nature. No, thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any more points. Well, it moves on to the freedom to make a religious party. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, what is actually a political party? What is a political party for all of you? For me, for you, Mr. Speaker and Madam Speakers? Well, it is an active action to participate into politics. It is directly saying that I want to lead, I want to make a difference in the world. I want to make a difference within the country. And why should we tell them that you can't make a difference within our society just because you have a specific religious belief, when even in our Constitution we say that you have the freedom to a certain religion? So that is why we strongly believe that this motion is infeasible. It directly goes against the spirit of democracy and the nature of parties. Now, our second point, it is actually infeasible. It is actually unrealistic to happen in today's world. First of all, who is going to regulate? Who is going to regulate who has to do politics and who has to stay home and read the Bible or the Quran or whatsoever? Who is going to do that? Who knows? There is no such thing as an ultimate supreme government that can deal with right and wrong, who goes in and out. And regarding the fact that there is no specific and strict definition between who gets to do politics and who stays home, but we say that it's impossible, that it's infeasible to pass this motion today and implement it in our real world. Now, what have I proven to you, Madam Speaker? Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen, sorry, well, Mr. Chair, there you go. Well, I have proven to you that the arguments provided by the previous speaker were not that good, and that our arguments are way better, and that our current status quo within the global society, in a democratic world, we should listen to the people's voice. Thank you.
Leader of opposition for the speech. Now I'd like to invite Junior from Paris to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, before I go on to a case with the very first stance that religion and politics should not mix, I would like to make majorly 3 rebuttals. Before my rebuttals, let me clarify a point. Now, the opposition actually has their case on an assumption that we are regulating individual senates with religious beliefs. But, Mr. Speaker, that is not the case. Look at the motion. It is about parties, not individual senates. And the reason why we believe parties are dangerous, religious parties are harmful, is because when these individuals with beliefs, religious belief, actually gather, they can actually have a huge influence on the political process. Therefore, we are debating on the motion about regulating religious parties, not individual senates. Now, let me go on to my first rebuttal. Now, the government the opposition is very concerned about the majority rule, but they say they are not neglecting the minority. But, Mr. Speaker, have they mentioned how they are going to guarantee the rights of the minority, Mr. Speaker? Of course they can't, because they have not mentioned any feasible way to guarantee the right of minorities, because these minorities, they are present in the society. However, if we let these religious groups, religious parties dominate the political party, it's only going to further the isolation of these minorities within the society. So it's actually going to lead to more negative harms for these minorities. Therefore, we want to pass this motion to prevent religious parties, to prevent further isolation of these minorities within the society. Yes.
We can apply that standard to your model as well, because if you have non-religious people passing a law that actually doesn't jive with these religious people who are a minority in the first place, we see that ends up very oppressing the minority there as well.
The reason why we want non-religious people, the reason why we want is to separate religion from politics. Therefore, the people who actually have religious beliefs or non-religious beliefs should not have a domination over the political system. Therefore, we ban these religious parties. Now, my second rebuttal is to their first argument about how it goes against the principles of democracy. Now, Mr. Speaker, they ask why can't these religious people also participate in democracy, because participation is important in democracy. But, Mr. Speaker, we believe we have clearly explained to you through the first argument that these religious parties, that when they gather, they're incapable of equally representing the rights and good of the whole citizens and the society, Mr. Speaker. So that actually goes against the fundamental building block of democracy, which is equal representation, Mr. Speaker. Because these clerics or these religious people who are actually engaged in politics will actually make it more favorable for themselves. Thus, we believe the domination of politics by religious groups is not should not stand. Therefore, the first argument actually harms the democratic principle that they want to support. Now, the second argument about who knows how do we separate these religious parties from other parties. Mr. Speaker, we have clearly mentioned that these parties actually have a constitution of their own, and when they actually agree to make a party, that they're under the constitution, it is clearly stated that they are gathered under a certain religion for a certain religious for the interest of a certain religious group. So, Mr. Speaker, their second argument also has the invisibility is also does not stand. Now, let me go on to our case. Now, my first speaker has talked to you about the effects on the democratic system, how there's no equal representation once these religious groups can actually dominate over the minority group. And my second argument will be about the negative effects on religions themselves if we actually allow these religious parties to mix within politics. Now the first argument is a conflict among religions. Now, Mr. Speaker, in religion, there exists a hierarchy. You know that there are seniors and priests and like popes that are on the top of the hierarchy in the religion, and it is very easy for these people to actually use religion as a tool to gain more political authority and more leverage over politics, so that they can make more favorable laws in the benefit of their own religion. So this will actually lead to other religions and atheists having anti-sentiments against this religion, and therefore there would actually be more conflict among religions themselves and among atheists and certain people of a certain religion. So, Mr. Speaker, if religion is already a dividing line, we see that religion is a source of conflict in many countries, such as Iraq, which is already a democracy. We see that we don't need to make more dividing lines. Therefore, we want to ban religious groups from coming into and budging into politics. Now, the second point about minority religions. Now, Mr. Speaker, this relates exactly back to how are they going to represent the minorities. Now, they talked about the election and how majorities are elected, therefore they should represent the people. However, then there are minority religions, such as Jehovah's Witness or the Amish in such countries. They have no power because they are so little in number. They cannot actually make an election, make a big election on the difference. Therefore, the dominating religions, it is so natural that the dominating religions will actually lead to take over the legislative system, and they will actually make more laws that are more beneficial for their own religion, and thus these minority religions will actually be hoarded into the more corners of the society, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is actually harmful for the minority religions as well. Now, the third point that I want to make, why is it so harmful on the religious groups themselves? The third point is about how religious, if we allow religious to be mixed with politics, that these religious people, the belief of these people can be swayed, which is actually very harmful for the religion themselves. Because, as we said, religion is a value based on belief, and if these people's beliefs are swayed, their religion is actually swayed in a whole. So, because we see that, because if a certain religion actually promotes a certain policy, which is very criticized and suppressed and criticized by the whole society, the people who are also within that religion with the same beliefs will also be criticized. Therefore, these people will actually be ashamed, or maybe be very it will be very difficult to pursue their own individual beliefs. And this is also another strain against the democratic right of basic freedom of religion. So therefore, if we allow these people to go in, democratic rights of equal representation and also the religious freedom is also lost, Mr. Speaker. So we see that actually as an example of my third, how the religious people, the belief of the people can be swayed. Let's look at the case of our president, Lee Myung-bak. Also, although he is an individual, I believe it is analogous because Lee Myung-bak is a senior of a Christian church. Many people who are actually against Lee Myung-bak criticize Christianity in themselves, and the Christians are the ones who are sabotaged, who are actually sacrificed under this political and religious game. So we believe, by this reason, because of negative effects on democratic system itself and the negative effects on religions, we believe that this motion should not pass. Thank you.
Thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Yang Song-ha. Again, before I move on to any kind of substantial details or any kind of voters on side proposition argument, let's make one thing clear and gentlemen. Just asserting something without proving it face-to-face doesn't make their case a strong one, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, keeping this in mind, let's look into the rebuttal of their arguments. I have so much to rebut, please bear with my fast speed of speaking, ladies and gentlemen. First, they say, okay, individual senators with religious mind gather up to form religious organizations, religious parties, ladies and gentlemen, and they claim it to be dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. So why is it dangerous in the first place, ladies and gentlemen? It is the voice of people that actually made these kind of parties possible, ladies and gentlemen. Who is there to decide whether certain kind of policy is dangerous or not, ladies and gentlemen? Team Edis is saying it is themselves. Team Edis who's going to decide what is dangerous and what is not. But we, Team Onsunuda, says it is up to the people to decide what is good for themselves and what is dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. One example they provide again and again was a Proposition 8, which was in California. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, it is no thank you, man. First of all, it is irrelevant to this case because it's not done by the religious parties, ladies and gentlemen. It was individual religious organizations that actually proposed Proposition 8, ladies and gentlemen. It is completely irrelevant. Second of all, so what's wrong about it? It's people's decision, it's their voice, and you're not here to decide whether Proposition 8 is good, Proposition 8 is good, or the gay marriage is good. Sit down, man. Now, second of all, they say it can't help minorities, ladies and gentlemen, but they have no idea what the status quo is, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, status quo, in a lot of democratic countries, these religious parties are actually the minorities in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. For example, in Greece and Italy, there is Alliance to Christ. There is minority organization that are going to further elaborate in my substance argument, ladies and gentlemen. Third of all, they say our policy goes against the principle of democracy, ladies and gentlemen. And because it cannot equally represent people's right. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Why can't they equally represent people's voice, ladies and gentlemen? We say if we actually ban these religious parties, it is themselves who are blocking people's voice in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, he says these parties have constitution, so it can be problematic. The matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, is every single party have a constitution. I don't know, for example, 한나라당 has something like Hey to Myeongbak, maybe 민주당 has party constitution, we say we have 조중동, but ladies and gentlemen, every parties in the world have a constitution, and why is it problematic? We have no idea, ladies and gentlemen. To build the next part, and they say clerics and popes can adversely affect the situation of status quo. First of all, these people in lots of democratic countries cannot become politicians in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. There are laws already set in place to block clerics and popes themselves to be actually the part of politics circle, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, at the status quo, other parties are also influenced by the other kind of people, ladies and gentlemen. Even if we just abolish all major political religious parties, ladies and gentlemen, there are these clerics and popes. If they want to do so, they're going to do other methods. They're going to influence other parties, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't have religious constitution, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. Six, they mentioned the minority religion. Okay, first of all, they mentioned how about Jehovah's Witness, how about other organizations. But ladies and gentlemen, what they want to do in today's debate is taking away that this Jehovah's Witness can have in national society, ladies and gentlemen. If we give official ground to this Jehovah's Witness, for example, to thank him, it will be beneficial for them, not harmful as they just observe in today's debate. Last of all, they say people will get ashamed when these politicians are swayed, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, many people are against Myeongbak. Okay, I understand. I don't like Myeongbak, my personal view. But ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it is clearly irrelevant because Myeongbak is not the party leader of 통일 천재 탄생당 or something. He's a part of the 한나라 party, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite irrelevant to this topic, and it no thank. It was the only thing they did to actually prove their second argument. So their second argument as a whole is irrelevant to today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. Now we limited every single argument they made. Let's look at what they have to say about this.
Okay, so you're saying we agree that minorities are also already isolated, so we want to prevent further isolation.
No, that's I knew what they mean. Giving them certain saying official political ground is not harmful to them. Let them have saying official ground, official legislation intended. So their view, I mentioned your PY, please have patience. Their view can actually be implemented in national society. So the leader of opposition in his second argument clearly pointed out the infeasibility of the motion. So let's go ahead and assume that their policy actually are implemented to our society. First, ladies and gentlemen, in case of smaller minority groups, our society loses the check and balance system within our political circle, ladies and gentlemen. For example, as I mentioned, parties like Greece and Italy's Alliance for Christ, ladies and gentlemen, they are there to actually have an advice on lots of systems, ladies and gentlemen. For example, in case of human stem cell research in Italy in 2004, this Alliance for Christ provided a valuable asset regarding religious nature of the problem. They were there to advise, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, in case of large majority parties that control its nation's policy, the one in Nigeria, a democratic country, one in Israel, a democratic country, democratic country, how this still propose a more serious problem in the state school agent? What exactly did Team Alice think when they just proposed to abolish such parties agent? I can confidently say that societal chaos is going to occur as a result of such policy agent. No, thank you. First of all, the whole legislative branch should be readjusted, and we stay on side opposition that this should entail a few serious problems, and it's even harder to talk about it. How are we going to deal with the incumbent congressmen in those kind of congress? Will we just dismiss them, or will we pick on new people for them? No, thank you, ma'am. Moving on to the next part of today's analysis, we are going to elaborate how this policy is going to set a wrong precedent, leading to sending a wrong message into the international society. Thank you. First of all, this will be composed in mainly two ways. First of all, why not other parties in general? There are other parties that have more radical constitution than the religious parties in general. To give a brief introduction to what these parties do, a party that got 20% in last year's presidential election in Russia, for example, do you know what they want to do? If they are gotten elected, they want to shoot a nuclear missile to Japan and to get every Western European country under Russia's influence in general. It is possible in democratic country because people's voice is what matters in general. We can't just go ahead and abolish these parties because its policies are so radical in general. And these parties, as I clearly said over and over again, has no harm about this in general. Now moving on to say, second part of our analysis. There are no perfect parties in the system. Every party has its pros and cons in general. However, it's the voice of people that matters. As in the case of Proposition 8, they are so obsessed about the general. It is not, we cannot just go ahead and say it's standards because Team Alice says standards. It is also people to decide what is good for themselves and what is bad for themselves in general. Now, what I'm saying in space, what does this debate boils down to? It boils down to one simple question in general. Here, Team Alice proved the burden of the proposition, actually proving how it's so harmful to the state school in general. And the only only answer to the question is simply no, they did not meet the burden of proof in general. One last question. Who's the mirror to expect? It is clearly team opposition that takes this one. Thank you very much.
But we said it's political parties themselves, written in Constitution, that they are religious representative during the presidential election. We say these political parties, these political parties are based on religion, and they have never gotten to understand that point. So they make a lot of misarguments. So their second argument about how the argument about infeasibility, about how are you going to regulate these people, how are you going to know if they read the Bible or not in their homes, this whole point does not stand at all. So let's look at their first argument about the spirit of democracy. Now they say the spirit of democracy is important and we have to wait until voices of the people change and whatnot. Well, we say, well, policies is a little different when it comes to making policies because you're not talking about what is right and wrong. That's not the role in the policies. And religion should never be involved in making policies because when you're talking about policies, you're just simply talking about government, how to govern certain things in the nation, how to run a nation so that you can make people enjoy more freely their rights and whatever benefits that they can have on the national level. So we say that's an entirely different thing. When you mix political parties or religious parties into politics, what happens is that policies are based on judgment calls. We say that's very, very important and that's very, very dangerous. We give an example of France, where the majority is a Roman Catholic. The legislature passed a law saying that hijabs are banned. We say that's a huge harm you see in the status quo. Downstairs. We say that's a huge harm that we see when policy religion is mixed into making policies. Now they say that people chooses the parties, and that the voice of people form parties. That's not really true because it's not that people say, oh, we agree with making this party. It's not that. But the thing is, these parties are formed by themselves. They make a constitution. They try to play part in the legislative branch. Now, they are true in saying that people vote how many seats these political parties will have in the Congress. The problem is, yes, it's a majority rule. And that's why it's dangerous, because being a majority rule means that there's a huge potential of the majority religion being reflected and the minority religion being all neglected. Now, we say that because it's specifically based on the majority, then it's easier for people to get swayed into by their religious beliefs, not based on policies that these political groups may offer to them. It's not based on judgment. It shouldn't be based on judgment calls, but eventually that's what it will become. Now they give us a ridiculous example about the 7 days and how we rest on Sunday, but we say that's ridiculous completely because it's not a reason based on religion itself, but it's more of a practice that came over history, and because for convenience sake, we say Sunday is we should rest on Sunday because everybody does it anyway. So let's go on into the second class, having all said that about that. Now, second class was about the religious parties. Now we say it's very, very important to not neglect minority religions, especially when you're guaranteeing that everybody has a freedom to religion, everybody has a right to practice religion, everybody has a right to be represented in the society Now we say when minority religions are being neglected because of the major political parties that are religious parties that are ruling in the Congress, we say that's a huge problem. We see examples like in Malaysia where there's a huge problem between where you're seen as a Muslim and where you're not. And we say that's a huge problem because there's a discrepancy and there's a distinct difference between the social parties, and there's always a discontent in the society that's never going to go away unless you remove those religious political parties. Now we also give you they gave the unfortunate case in Portugal about stem cell research, and religious political parties came in and they sort of managed and they sort of overlooked and they gave advice over the stem cell research project and whatnot. But first of all, what does religion have to do with stem cell research project? And secondly, this could have worked backwards and said it could have worked against the stem cell project and whatnot. So we say, and on the third point, we say it's especially maybe even more dangerous to minority political parties. Now, how does it help being in the political process if it's based on a majority rule, even if a minority political party
we come into a presidential election, what will be done is that people actually shun them away because people already are into the concept of separating the state and the church. People already want that separation, and they redeem that separation as important. Now, what happens is that these minority groups, these minority religions, will be shunned away, and they'll be seen as if they want to make more power. They want to have more power to become to promote their own religion. So it actually backfires on the minority religions versus minority religious groups. So we say, all in all, in this debate, the government has been very clear on what we have been saying. We give you tangible dangers. We have given you tangible dangers. They have not given us any tangible benefits. Therefore, we take this debate home. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Wood, for her speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition with speech.
The government whip came up here and gave us this really weird verdict. Because the burden of the government side is actually to prove that the need to abolish religious parties is so great that we actually have to risk the dire consequences, which we have been talking about for the past 14 minutes. So we say that our burden is to prove that their policy will only harm status quo, something that each of my speakers have been harping on about again and again. So let me, not further ado, let me present to you the two clashes that I saw in this debate. First, do religious parties really cause any tangible harms? Second, what is the aftermath of such a policy? Something that only we have the realistic views on. But before that, let me just nitpick on how. First of all, they didn't even have a rebuttal on the Proposition 8. So again, they have no tangible, all of their arguments are based on assertion. They still couldn't give us the tangible evidence that religious parties have caused that kind of harm. Second, they also couldn't rebut how other parties are influenced by political leaders or powerful people anyway. So their whole point on how people are going to use religion as a political tool doesn't stand. So let me move on to my first clash, which is about the supposed harms of religious parties. The only thing that I really got from their side was that religion and politics shouldn't mix, because when people practice religion, they're only going to focus their judgment on the values. But Mr. Speaker, first of all, these people aren't stupid religious people who just run for office. We see that in essence, they still are politicians, and they're not going to be stupid enough to pass bills purely based on values. We see that although we can see that if you have a religion, you do have a certain set of strict values, keep standing, that you abide by. We say that these people aren't going to be dumb enough to pass bills that's going to cause social chaos, just because they didn't think about the actual after effects. So we say that point on how people are going to make misjudgments isn't going to stand. Point.
So your first speaker has mentioned that you're going to protect the minority rights, but how can you guarantee?
Okay, I'm not even on that yet, so please sit down. Okay, second, we say that first, we don't see a problem with Proposition 8 or whatever. When the majority voted for this representative in the first place, or the majority voted for this religious party. So that actually brings me on to this whole thing about democracy. We say that it's the legislature's responsibility to make the judgment about whether a policy should pass or not edits. So we say that let's tackle this point on religious minorities and how it's actually contrary to democracy. First of all, religious minorities are interest groups, and oppression happens anyway in status quo, no matter what we do. And we say that just because their policy stands, it's not going to solve this oppression problem of these minority religions. So they can't throw that burden at us. It's not our point. It's not our burden to prove that these religious people are going to be saved by religious parties and politics. It's their burden to tell us why their policy actually saves these oppressed people. Your point. Last.
Okay, fine, it's not your burden to prove that these religious minorities will be saved, but neither is it our burden to prove that religious minorities will not be saved, but it's we already talked to you about how minorities will be actually harmed.
So their biggest example was how if people want, they were talking about how religious minorities were going to be oppressed because people want separation. But we can actually ask you, if the people wanted a separation of the church and the state in the first place. Why is this a problem? Because then even these major religions become a minority. So we see that their whole point doesn't really stand. So let me continue to talk about what I was talking about before I was, never mind. They talked about conflicts between religions, and they told us about minority religions. But the weirdest point that I actually got from them was this thing about danger, how dangerous it is. They told us how the religion would be swayed, and people would be ashamed if they criticize their policy, and it harms all members of the religion. You see that, first of all, when these political leaders have a religion, you see that they're not going to make these policies that they know will negatively affect on their religion. First of all, if the people voted for them, they gave them the power and chose in their judgment to make these policies in the first place. And we say that these political leaders aren't going to pass bills purely that's what I said about them. They're not going to pass bills purely based on their judgment. They're going to pass these bills weighing the pros and cons as a normal, average, reasonable person should with a little religious influence. And we see that this happens in status quo anyway, because any average person has his or her own set of values. So that no person can be completely unbiased. But hold up, no more points. So that leads me on to my second issue, which is about the aftermath. They nitpicked on how feasibility isn't they said that all we said about feasibility was about how we're going to identify non-religious political parties from political parties. But the real issue here about feasibility is, first of all, who has the right to judge if these political parties if these religious parties should be allowed to run in politics or not? Because we see that, first of all, even though there is a unified idea of politics and government throughout the whole world, we see that, first of all, standards are different in every country. And you're actually oppressing these religious people as well, and you're actually denying them their democratic rights. Sit down. You're actually denying them their democratic rights when you're not letting them run for politics in the first place. And we say that it's infeasible because this is something that's happening in status quo, as we've proven with our two speakers and told you over and over again that this is in place in other countries. So this actually brings me on to the social aftermath. What happens when you actually implement this policy? What happens to the religious parties who are already in power? And what happens to the nations that have these religious parties in power? You see that there's no way, and there's no actual way for them to no actual way for us to replace people in the legislature. There's no governing body that's going to be able that has the authority to tell these religious parties that you're not allowed to be in politics because we believe that religion and state should be separate. So we say that is the issue on infeasibility that we want to talk about. So on to social aftermath. We say that people aren't going to, why is it that people vote for religious parties in the first place? It's because they believe that these religious parties represent their majority vote. So when the majority, I'm going to talk about this on two levels. First, when they are the majority, and second, when they're the minority. First of all, when they're the minority, it doesn't really make a difference, and they're going to become another minority group in status quo anyway, so that doesn't really matter. But second, what if they are the majority party? What if they are the ones that the people voted for? We say that there isn't a problem. Because fine, let's talk about Prop 8 again, even though it had nothing to do with religion. If that was a religious issue, we say that would mean that the majority of the people in California, they don't want homosexual marriage. So we say that with that logic, we're not supposed to pass that policy because the majority of people there, they don't want homosexuals getting married. And we say that in itself is already the spirit of democracy, which we on opposition really want to declare here in status quo today. So let me sum up to you what I've been talking about for the past almost 7 minutes. First of all, I presented to you the burden which each side is supposed to prove and how government didn't prove their burden. Second, I talked to you about the two issues that I saw as debate. First, do religious parties actually cause any harm? Unproven. Second, what is the aftermath of such a policy? We talked to you about infeasibility. We talked to you about social aftermath. All they had to say was that we can identify religious leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, since it's quite evident that my whip did a very great job, but was very fast and was really made you kind of tired, I would like to do something entertaining with my speech. However, this is the quarterfinals, and we really did a great job, and we really sweated into making this policy and things like that. So we're going to ask you to also share our verdict in the quarterfinals. So what I propose is to do a brain exercise. Yes. So what we're basically going to do is going to imagine two worlds, two parallel worlds, in which we call one the Snuda world and the other world the Edis world. So let's start with talking about the differences in our world, and then you get to decide which world is the better world and which world you want to live in. So starting the brain exercise. Listen carefully. First, in the Edis world, there is no such thing as the freedom if you're a politician. You have to be, and regarding the fact that even though it seems nitpicking, well, she did define it that way. She literally defined it that way. So if you're a politician, you have to be totally unreligious. However, in our world, even though you're a politician, since it's one of your basic human rights, we let you have your religion. Now, moving on. Well, in the Edis world, if you pass this motion today, all the political parties related to religious interests will just suddenly disappear and say that, oh, we admit we're the bad guys and we're going to disappear. And we could be able to tell the difference between a religious political party and a non-religious party by looking at a certain document and looking out if they have the word religion by using Control F and then typing in religion. However, in our world, we say that it's not that easy, it's not that simple as that, it's more complicated. And regarding the fact that it will cause, in fact, chaos. As my brilliant whip speaker pointed out, if they were the majority, we would tell them to leave their political power, and well, that's not going to happen in our world, which, whatever. And then if they were the minority, well, the people would choose not to vote for them, and they will normally disappear according to the democratic rule. Now, moving on to the Edis world again. Well, parties in their world cannot be freely made. If they have religious interests, well, they're not going to allow the politicians to make a certain party. However, in the Suna world, you get to make a free political party if you just want to, even though you may have religious beliefs. Now, moving on. Well, you guys are catching up with the differences in the two worlds, right? Because you have to make a difference, especially you, Mr. Speaker. Now, in the Edis world, a certain group of people get to decide which one is a religious group and which one is a non-religious group. And well, of course, if the Edis team would do a great job, or actually they're doing a great job as debaters, but they're not politicians. And well, honestly speaking, I'm not sure if I could trust their decisions. And however, in our world, in this world, well, the people, the majority, the public can have the right and get to choose which party stays and which party should leave by voting, by using the stance, and expressing their political rights. Now, in the Edis world, well, I don't know, this might not be detrimental since they really did rebut it, but anyways, they don't get to rest on Sundays, they don't get to rest on Christmas, they don't get to rest on Buddha's birthday. However, in part, you get to rest on Sundays, you don't have to go to school on Sundays, you don't have to go to school on Christmas, you don't have to go to school on Buddha's Christmas. So, that's one final difference between the Edis world and our world. This is the most important difference, so keep this in mind. Well, in this world, Edis goes to the final round, and this world, Snuda goes to the final round. So, final question. In which world would you like to live? Snuda's world! Thank you!
Alright, to end today's semifinals, I summary just document
had fun going back and forth in two worlds. It was entertaining to see him go back to Snuda world and Edis world. Well, we want to tell you that Edis world is the world that we want to see, because church and state should never come together, and that's exactly what democracy is. Now, I don't like it when the opposition doesn't listen to my speech. I've told you from the very beginning that politicians can have any religion they want. It doesn't matter. We don't care. But the problem is when they come into groups and start practicing religion and start putting this into their laws and their policies. We don't want to see that, Mr. Speaker. Now, they think this was complicated. Well, I'm sorry, it's your fault that this debate was so complicated at the end of the day. So in today's debate, our stance is very clear, Mr. Speaker, that religion and politics just never mixes. Now, This debate can be dealt in two questions. The first being, what is religion in democracy? The second question is, when is religion limited? Now, we told you, Mr. Speaker, that once you implement democracy in a policy, people start putting their ideas into these policies and start prioritizing this policy. We don't think that these things should ever happen. We say that it's a distortion of legislators, a distortion of representation. While democracy is supposed to be about each individual's ideas, what religious parties do is basically put religious groups have their ideas in one group. We don't think that we want to see values in these groups, especially when it comes to religion. Now, what they told us was that people vote for them. What we told you, Mr. Speaker, was that yes, these people do vote for them, but they don't vote for the party at the end of the day. Even when we don't think that this should be a policy that you agree with because you're oppressing minority religions. They also told us a simplistic idea that politicians will put political ideas because they're politicians. We say that's a very simplistic idea to think that politicians will all of a sudden put political ideas in their policies because we don't think that people are that simple. No, we say that politicians will put political opinions because they said that they will do that, but we don't agree with that, Mr. Speaker. Democracy is about separation between church and state. They totally went against that idea and thought that Snoota World's idea that church and state can come together works. It doesn't work in a democracy at all. They told us that it's not feasible. Well, we told you from the very beginning. Again, they didn't listen. That we are going to look at the constitutions of these parties, going to look at their rules. They haven't been listening to what we've said from the very beginning. So their 7 days ideas and these kind of policies just will not work. They gave us examples like Greece and Italy. Well, give us an idea on how these countries actually benefited from these policies of people having religious groups. Now, the second question, when is religion limited? We told you that people can practice religion as long as they don't harm anyone. But they will harm people in mass groups if you put religion and politics together. We told you that about the hierarchy that exists within religion. For example, other religions like atheists and Jehovah's Witnesses, all the examples that you give are going to be oppressed at the end of the day. They told us that religion gives advice. They can give advice, but they will not be in political parties under our policy. Jehovah's Witness, well, I'm sorry, but I really want to receive other people's blood if I'm about to die. I don't want a person starting to put political issues with religious issues and tell me that you can't have any blood because it's our religion. Mr. Speaker, they just told us about democratic votes. We don't think that this is going to justify anything. At the end of the day, the government gave you dangers and reason why we should uphold democracy. The opposition just gave us no benefits. Did not give us any benefits. Just said it's good, and that was simple, like that. We only rebutted and was very defensive in today's debate while saying nothing positive in today's debate. We say, therefore, Mr. Speaker, we take this debate and religion and politics will never mix.